A Republican congressman accuses Donald Trump of impeachable behavior. The first crack in the president's GOP base, or no big deal? We're taking a look on this edition of PoliticKIng. Welcome to PoliticKIng. I'm Matthew Cook, in for Larry King. There is now a Republican member of Congress who says Donald Trump has engaged in impeachable behavior. His name is Justin Amash from Michigan, and he also claims that Attorney General William Barr deliberately misled the public about the Mueller report. Does this signify a worrisome crack in the Republican wall protecting the president? Let's start there with the political panel. They are Chris Wilson. He was Director of Research and Digital Strategy for Ted Cruz's 2016 presidential campaign. He's in New York City. And in Chattanooga, Tennessee, Brian Joyce, host of The Brian Joyce Show on talk radio, airing on WGOW-FM. So Representative Justin Amash of Michigan has become the first Republican member of Congress to declare that Donald Trump has engaged in impeachable behavior. He also asserts that Attorney General William Barr deliberately misled the public about the findings of the Mueller report. What's the significance of this assessment? Let's start with you, Chris.
Well, Justin Amash gives Nancy Pelosi cover that I'm not sure that she wants to begin proceedings on impeachment. But when it gets down to it, she's shown no appetite for it, despite the far left wing of her party wanting it. And so what this now does is, I think, gives the Rashida Tlaib's, the Ocasio-Cortez's ammunition to go to her and say, look, see, even other Republicans are calling for it. But the reality is there's no practical effect of it. What this would do is, even if the House did decide to impeach, even if every single Democrat and Amash voted, it would have zero impact, because when it goes to the Senate, it's controlled by Republicans and they're not going to impeach him. So all this does is pull Democrats into a bit of a rope-a-dope strategy, because every poll shows it's not something the American public supports. It's not something they want. And it's really something that I think the leadership of the Democratic Party, those who are sort of the saner members of the party, the Pelosi's, the Hoyers, and I can't believe I'm using those words to apply to them now, but it shows how far left the party's moved at this point in 2019. It's something they want to stay away from. But really, when you look at Justin Amash, he's never been something you would call a mainstream Republican. In fact, he is really way out in left field on a lot of issues, and many times is the only Republican to vote a certain way. And I think you'd make a strong argument that this is an attention-gathering, grabbing stunt for him. And it could be that he's just tired of the House and is just looking to run for president as a libertarian.
Brian, your reaction?
Well, first of all, I would agree with Chris that at the end of the day, I don't think this debate over impeachment is going to matter. As Chris pointed out, Republicans hold the Senate, so impeachment will die there. And the fact of the matter is, even if it didn't die there, does anybody see Donald Trump respecting an impeachment vote and actually stepping down? That will never happen. So this is all irrelevant anyway. I do think it's nice to see at least one Republican like Justin Amash step up, because at the end of the day, you know, I've found it a little bit disingenuous, Matthew, that it seems like all the responsibility falls on Democrats to walk this political tightrope about impeachment, and everybody's asking, you know, should the Democrats pursue impeachment? The fact of the matter is, Republicans have access to the same Mueller report that Democrats have, if we ever get access to it. They know that this president has committed impeachable offenses. Why isn't the responsibility on the Republican Party? It's like the Democrats are the only party left that has any regard for the Constitution. So it's nice to see at least one Republican like Justin Amash step up and say, you know what, I'm going to put country ahead of party. This man has committed impeachable offenses, and I don't care if he's a member of my own party. I'm just willing to speak the truth. It's nice to see that.
So Trump and many GOP politicians are carefully trying to distance themselves from the new Alabama abortion ban. What are the political implications of this law? Let's start with you, Brian.
Well, first of all, I'm in Tennessee right now, and I'm right on the border with Alabama. And I can tell you straight up, Matthew, as somebody who resides in a red state, we are the people who are affected by this law. And the fact of the matter is, most Republicans, if you ask them behind closed doors, they think this is preposterous. Now, we all know, anybody who's following this knows, that the reason why red states like Georgia and Alabama and Missouri are pursuing these issues is because they want to get this back in front of the Supreme Court. They've come right out and said it. They know they're passing illegal laws. They know they're passing unconstitutional laws when it comes to a woman's right to choose. They're doing it because the court has tilted in their favor. It has tilted a lot in their favor, especially over the past just 2 years. And so they want to get this issue back in front of the Supreme Court. And if this is the way to do it, I mean, I can't argue that it's a pretty effective way to do it. The fact of the matter is the law itself is absolutely ridiculous. If you were to pull the governor of Alabama, Kay Ivey, aside behind closed doors and ask her as a woman, Miss Ivey, do you really think that a 15-year-old rape victim with her parents' consent should not be allowed to abort a fetus? Her answer would be no. Of course not. That's ridiculous. But they want to get this in front of the Supreme Court, and so they've signed off on it.
Chris?
Well, there's so much to unpack in this. Let me just say, I'm going to disclose where I'm coming from this from the outset. I am pro-life, and I support the law. I think it's a good law, but I'll go through it from a constitutional perspective. One, there are almost no constitutional lawyers on the right or the left who will argue that Roe versus Wade was decided constitutionally. So to argue that somehow that represents the intent of the Constitution is fallacious in and of itself. But the one thing that I think is important here is that I've often said that really my beliefs on this matter are sort of irrelevant, because I've always believed that science would ultimately decide the issue of abortion. And what this gets down to is whether or not you believe a beating heart determines whether or not life is beginning. And if you do believe that a beating heart is when life begins, then you support the Alabama law. If you don't believe that, and that's where I guess you have a difference in what science implies, then you probably come closer to a New York law that allows abortion right through the 9th month and right up until the time of birth. And that's what we're getting down to now. And I'll make an argument here for a little bit of unity. I think it is better for us to have this argument, or this discussion, if you will, in May of 2019 than in the fall of 2020, because hopefully we can do it with a little bit more respect for each other's feelings and respect for where each other's coming from whenever it is during the legislative process, than having two people on a debate stage yelling at each other about it. And ultimately, as I said, I believe science will decide this question, because if we come to the conclusion that this is a life, then hopefully we can all come to the conclusion that it is wrong, morally wrong, to take that life.
We'll continue the conversation with Chris Wilson and Brian Joyce after the break. What about taking a goal-oriented approach to this issue? I mean, do you believe that all pro-choice people don't believe that a beating heart equals a life? In other words, does it have to be illegal in order for us to reduce abortion?
Yeah, that's a great question, and that's why I stayed away from, as a pollster, it probably surprised you I stay away from public opinion on this, is because it's very nuanced when it gets down to it. I mean, if you analyze the numbers overall, one of the fallacies that exists is that women are actually more pro-life nationally than men are. Number two is, if you define it based on, if you just ask people, are you more pro-life or more pro-choice, it's really about split. It's about 45-45. But when it gets down to definition by trimesters, if you look within the first 3 months, then most Americans support it. If it's in the last 3 months, very few Americans support it. So how do you start to define this in terms of, is it by trimester, is it by week? And that's why I've said, really, I believe it comes down to science, is when the beating heart, when you believe it becomes alive, and when most people would agree, and research and public opinion shows this, that is whenever you can detect a beating heart.
Let's switch gears again. Democrats were supposed to be angry and pushing for progressive change into 2020. So how come Joe Biden, who's an old white guy who talks about a middle-of-the-road approach, how is he leading the party's presidential pack in the polls? Brian, let's start with you.
I think he's leading the pack in the polls because he's the best candidate. And the fact of the matter is, look, I mean, all of these young, Berniac wing of the Democratic Party, the fact of the matter is Joe Biden has been a staunch liberal Democrat his entire life on almost every issue. And this is where Democrats constantly shoot themselves in the foot. And I always give Republicans more credit than Democrats on this issue. Republicans will circle the wagon. They might not get the perfect candidate they want, but if he's close enough, we'll circle the wagons and we'll get behind our guy. Meanwhile, what do liberals do? Liberals shoot themselves in the foot and they argue over the most minute policy details and come up with a way, some imaginary argument in their head where Joe Biden is suddenly, basically a Republican in a Democrat suit. I mean, give me a break. This guy has been on every left-wing side of almost every issue, whether it's labor law, whether it's a woman's right to choose, no matter what the issue is, Joe Biden has been a staunch Democrat his entire life. And, if these young kids who follow the Berniac side of the party don't get that, well, then grow up and read a book. That would be my advice to them. And my other piece of advice would be circle the wagons. I mean, we saw this in 2016. I don't think Chris would debate with me that most Republicans did not exactly like Donald Trump, but they did the Republican thing. They circled the wagons and they got behind their candidate in a way that the left did not do with Hillary Clinton. So Democrats are going to have to, if they're going to have to learn that lesson again the hard way in 2020, well, they're going to learn it the hard way.
Chris, is Brian talking sense?
Yeah, I would say, well, first of all, it's the first time I think I've ever heard the word Young and Bernie in the same sentence, but it was well handled. I do think if you look at the history of Joe Biden, he ran for president in 1998 as a far-left liberal Democrat. He ran in 2008 as a far-left liberal Democrat. I would argue the fact that he is now being defined as a moderate shows just how far the left wing of the liberal Democratic Party has moved. And in fact, you have the number one contender, and he's becoming less and less of a contender every day, being Bernie Sanders, who is not even a Democrat. He is a capital D socialist. So from that standpoint, I think it really is an illustration of the challenges the Democratic Party faces reconnecting with regular Americans, and the problem that they're going to have winning back a lot of those Rust Belt states that Donald Trump was able to beat Hillary Clinton in 2016. Now, Biden is doing an interesting thing in terms of sort of redefine himself. Now, I also agree with Brian. He hasn't really moved very much in terms of where he is, but he's being redefined by the rest of the other 23 candidates that are in the race, or I forget, it could be 25 or 27. I haven't checked the news since I sat down here. But the other aspect is he's trying to make it about a sort of a re-examination of the Obama record. And there's 8 years of the Obama record. And I found it interesting as he announced for the third time in Pennsylvania last week, or it was Saturday, and in Pennsylvania, since Donald Trump took over as president, there's been 5,000 manufacturing jobs created. In the 8 years under Obama-Biden, there were 50,000 manufacturing jobs lost. And that's the fight that Biden is going to have as he continues to try and remind everybody about the Obama-Biden record in these hard-hit Rust Belt states. And you find, Pennsylvania is another perfect example where there are multiple counties in which Obama won overwhelmingly in 2008, and then Trump won those same counties in 2016 by the same sort of margins. And so I think trying to refight that last battle, which is what it seems to me that he's doing in terms of reminding people, it's going to be very helpful in a Democratic primary. There's no question Democratic primary voters love Barack Obama. But in a general election, I think that is, look, you could not have had Donald Trump elected if not for the record of Obama and Biden.
I think a lot of the confusion comes from the fact that on social media, where a lot of the more vocal members of the left wing are active, is they talk about the big issues like the '94 crime bill, and they talk about Biden's vote for the Iraq war. And these are the voices that make it sound like Biden, is more to the right. So I think we'll see how it plays out during the debates. But Chris and Brian, thank you so much for your time today. More politicking after the break.